It is a great honor, and I can tell you it sounds maybe odd, but it's not. It's a treat to have Sister Helen Prejean. She talked about how she's a nun, so pray, and then Sean, maybe go smooth on the whiskey. But the spirit, just in a few minutes, is extraordinary, the indomitable spirit and the humor, which I think she needs in light of the extraordinary work she has done in these last years. It's also a pivotal time to meet, as Sister Helen's article for The Nation indicated. Joe Biden, President Biden, campaigned on ending the federal death penalty. He said he abhors the death penalty. He could do a lot, as Sister Helen laid out. And we are now looking at Virginia. I don't know if you know, and I hope I get this right, Sister. Virginia is the death penalty capital of the United States. And after 412 years and 1,391 executions, Virginia is poised to abolish the death penalty. These are moments to hear, always moments to hear from Sister Helen. She's been instrumental over decades in sparking a national dialogue on capital punishment and shaping the Catholic Church's vigorous opposition to all executions. Born in Louisiana, yes, Baton Rouge, she joined the Sisters of St. Joseph in 1957, I think. And after witnessing several executions, Sister Helen realized that this lethal ritual would remain unchallenged unless its secrecy was stripped away. And so she sat down and wrote a book, which many of you may have read, called Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty in the United States. And the book hit the shelves, if one might say, when the support for the death penalty in this country was over 80%. And in Sister Helen's native Louisiana, closer to 90%. The book, as you all know, became a movie, Dead Man Walking. She's written several other books. But today, as I said, we're at a pivotal moment. Capital punishment is still on this book's, Sister Helen, in 27 or 30 states. And it's fallen into disuse in many of these states, and prosecutors and juries alike are turning away from death sentences. But the work continues because we have not seen abolition at a federal level. President Biden could do quite a bit in terms of ending the federal death penalty, but also commuting the federal death penalty to life sentences. So I want to turn it over to Sister Helen. We're very grateful. This is an issue that the nation, and thank you for your words about the nation earlier, has been committed to since it was founded in 1865. So thank you for being with us, and we look forward to a spirited, important discussion.
Yeah, look, very, very happy to talk to you. Your work, our work is so important. How do you change the consciousness and conscience of a nation? How does it happen? How do you change the consciousness of the Catholic Church, which for 1,300 years of dialogue upheld the right of the state to take life? And then in August 2018, you had Pope Francis changing the book, the catechism, the official doctrine. The last thing that happens is when you change what's on the books. It's the awakening of the people that has to happen. And so we are comrades in arms on this. We are collaborators. Your work as journalists is to do precisely that. And I just applaud you because of your fidelity in season, out of season, to get the word out to people and for them to use their intellects, critical thinking, but then also the drama, the emotion as well, to bring people close. That's been my job. I put eyewitness in Dead Man Walking, put eyewitness in The Death of Innocence, an eyewitness account of wrongful executions. By the way, one of the reasons for the moving away from the death penalty is the huge number of mistakes. DPIC just added 11 more wrongfully convicted people. It is now at 185 since the death penalty was put back in 77. 185 people, by luck, grace of God, duct tape, baling wire, a good lawyer, managed to get off a death row. And it's not because simply no system's perfect and mistakes are made. It is clearly prosecutorial misconduct and police misconduct that led to these wrongful executions. It is so bad that there've been over 1,500 executions. If you ran an airline, for every 8 flights that made it and landed, one would go down in flames. 1 in 8. That's how broken it is. But the awareness also is gradual. I mean, the images in the gospel, the images in spiritual tradition are of seeds growing. There's in the psalm, truth springs up from the ground. It's the people. Truth springs up from the ground. This past election, Stacey Abrams, the organizing of the Black vote and Black people to vote in Georgia, it rises up from the ground. And that's our work. We are the ones who speak to the people. The nation plays a key role also in influencing the intellectual community to get the thinkers out there. My story is, I just finished telling it, by the way, and it's called River of Fire. River of Fire. The last page of River of Fire is the first page of Dead Man Walking. I had to break out of 2 cocoons to become an activist. The subtitle is On Becoming an Activist. One was the spiritual cocoon, a nun. If I prayed for people, I mean, God takes care of the big problems of the world. I would say, I'm apolitical, I'm spiritual. I don't get involved in all this messy politics. I had to break out of that to see the radical dimension, really, of the gospel of Jesus. Which is to be on the side of the poor and struggling ones. Real religion is about liberation. It's liberation of consciousness. Real religion is about connecting people and overcoming the barriers that divide us, and where some lord it over others and are very wealthy and the others suffer. It's radical justice. And I had to wake up spiritually, and then I also had to wake up out of my all-white suburb in New Orleans. And I talk about waking the lightning chapter when I woke up and then moved into the St. Thomas housing projects. And for the first time in my life, lived among African-American people who became my teachers. White privilege is something we don't even know we have. We don't know we're looking through the lens of white privilege or experiencing life. And so when we look at others and you hear things like, well, why don't those people get jobs? Why don't those people, don't they know education is the gate? The whole thing. I don't know how to turn that phone off. Y'all just bear with it. Um, and and they became my teachers. I grew up in the Jim Crow days in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Ellen worked in the house with Mama, and Jesse worked in the yard, didn't even know their last names. We lived in the big white house. My daddy was a successful lawyer, and they lived in the servants' quarters. And here's what culture does. Culture, well, honey, it's just the way things are. It's better for the races to be separate. And these are good people saying this, my good mom and daddy, but not understanding. I mean, we are on the cusp now of something so big with George Floyd. Maybe COVID helped people in their homes, and they're watching that 8 minutes and 46 seconds of that man's life being squeezed out of him under the knee of a white policeman. And then the debate and discussion begins. And first off, well, it's a few bad road cops. Not everybody's like that, all that kind of stuff. But what you want to do is get debate going. The reason you even heard of Dead Man Walking is because I had an excellent editor at Random House who worked with me. He got the whole first draft, and then I went up to New York, sat with him. This is why I so appreciate editors. Um, and he sat and he just said, Helen, nobody's going to read your book. And the reason is you're Catholic nun, you're a spiritual advisor of this person on death row. And you are spending so much time in your book just about his human rights, why the state shouldn't be executing him and all that. And you wait far too long to talk about the crime. I mean, this man and his brother shot in cold blood, point blank rage, 2 teenage kids in the back of the head and left them dead in a sugarcane field. And it's just like you're so into his human rights. It's like you can't face what they did, and nobody's going to read your book. They're going to think, well, she's a Catholic nun, she believes in Jesus, forgiveness. They're going to expect every religious platitude out of your mouth. If you don't talk about that crime and your own horror at it, outrage at it, In the first 10 pages, nobody's going to read your book. And he helped me shape the story. And it also shaped every talk, every that I've crisscrossed this nation to give it its story. As the lawyers are fond of saying, the one who tells the whole story wins the case. You know that as journalists. You want to bring the reader into the whole scene of things. And so I get involved writing a man, the last page of River Fire, first page, Dead Man Walking. Hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal to somebody on death row? But see, I had changed my locus. I had changed where I was. I'd moved out of the suburbs. And once you move into a new field where things are happening, a lot of things happen. And I got that invitation to write to somebody on death row. And I went and visited him, never dreaming that I would be there when he was executed. And that's the fire in River of Fire. They killed a man with fire one night. They strapped him in a wooden chair and pumped electricity into his body until he was dead. His killing was a legal act because he had killed. No religious leaders protested the killing that night, but I was there. I saw it with my own eyes, and what I saw set my soul on fire. And now here's an account of how I came to be in the killing chamber. So it's a journey of awakening and fire. The fire's the passion, of course. And there's a saying from Latin America, what the eye does not see, the heart cannot feel. And I came out of that execution chamber that night. It was early morning hours of April 5th, 1984, and realized the people are never going to get close to this. It's a secret ritual. There have been 2 court cases, at least, to try to make executions public, and they both have been defeated. But I was a witness. I had seen it. And it was a moral imperative for me to begin to work for abolition of the death penalty. And I believe in the goodness of the American people. I believe most people are good. Most people do not want to have the government killing for them. They had been made to be very afraid. They have been told there were some people who, by their character and by the nature of their deed, have done something so evil and so heinous. And in their character, they are killers. We can't even trust to put them in prison. They'll kill other inmates or guards. And so we got to kill them. And you keep people separate from a reality and you make people afraid. That's why, I don't know, I think the average is over 70% of people say they support torture for terrorists that could like blow up a city. Removed from something, people, the worst, the most fearful selves come forward. Our job is to wake people up and to bring them close. And that's why I feel this kinship with you, this bond with you. So here I write this book, and with the help of Jason, it told the whole story. Tim Robbins said it was the easiest screenplay he had ever written because it takes you over to both sides. He explained the difference between art and propaganda. And when you do a film, propaganda means he's so against the death penalty, that whole story is going to be shaped from beginning to end. You do the crime early on, it fades in people's minds. All the sympathy is with the person and his mother who's about to be executed. And art is you honestly bring people over to both sides. And the boldness in the film of Dead Man Walking is the ending scene is the execution of Matthew Poncelet, and everyone has witnessed his own journey of force not admitting, then being remorseful, then asking forgiveness. But his death, his killing, is juxtaposed with his killing of innocent people in the woods, and it shows the crime side by side with the execution. It's the boldest thing that Tim Robbins said he ever did in a film. The whole editing committee was saying to him, no, don't show that final killing. Again, you've got the audience with the execution. He goes, I don't want to have the audience. And because you want the people to do the thinking. And the other thing I learned from Jason Epstein in writing Dead Man Walking was he said, you put all your information in footnotes about race and the death penalty, about poverty and the death penalty. Everything you put in footnotes. Only the scholars are going to read the footnotes. And the gift of good writing is people are going to follow for story. And then you shingle in every bit of information you know they don't know about how it costs more to execute them. And that's your job. By the time they close the pages of that book, they know all the important information they need to know. And of course, you know that. You know what it is to write and get it out there. I mean, now we're going through a huge learning curve in the country. The best-selling books are on systemic racism and the legacy of slavery. You know, Kendi, Stand from the Beginning, all these really, it's white people on the learning curve, mostly. Black people know what's going on. They have experienced the legacy, but we're all learning. It's a huge time of awakening about race in the United States. And this is the first time we've ever had presidential candidates who say they're against the death penalty. And the leaders can say it when the people have awakened enough. There's enough experience of people and people writing and people being at executions and lawyers working on the case. And these federal executions, these 13 people killed within 6 months, just brought it out to light how broken the thing is. And that's what I wrote about for your paper and with you. And it's up to the discretion of prosecutors to seek death or not. Impossible criteria, only the worst of the worst. Nobody knows what that means, coupled with the discretion of a prosecutor. And the truth is, if a prosecutor from the trial level on does not seek death, nobody's going to die. And 17 years, federal jurisdiction, no executions, enter Trump and Barr. It was like shooting cans on the fence. Let's kill this one, this one, this one, this one. They did it because they could, and they had been given the power. With the Catholic Church and the spiritual dimension of this, it's the moral, it's the recognition of the inviolable dignity of human life. The next thing I want to write about is torture is endemic to the death penalty, because you cannot take conscious, imaginative beings, put them in a small holding space for 20 years where they anticipate and imagine their death and then are taken out to be killed. It's the UN Convention Against Torture. The definition is an extreme mental or physical assault on someone rendered defenseless. How defenseless can you be other than to be strapped down and then deliberately to be killed? And so I've accompanied 6 people to execution, and everybody dies inside their mind and in their nightmares 1,000 times before they die. It is the practice of torture. The last people to wake up are going to be our Supreme Court members. They are privileged people who, when they read the words equal justice or equal protection of the laws, they read it through the lens of their white experience, their privileged experience. As Thurgood Marshall says, when a Black man reads those words, that's one thing. When white privileged people read those words, it's another. There is no neutral way ever to interpret a text. We always bring our life experience to the interpretation of text, and the Constitution is no different. And one of the things I did in Dead Man Walking and The Death of Innocence is the Constitution belongs to us, the people. And so we have to explore that Constitution. We have to look at what's going on and say, we are not living up to our own words here. How can you not recognize that to take a human being and kill them is an act of cruelty? What keeps you from seeing that? But as the people have experienced, and then we write about it and we share about it and we work together in that, people's consciousness changes and we change as a country. So that'll be my opening little salvo.
Thank you, Sister Prejean. I wanted to ask you, you talked about the Latin American saying, what the eye cannot see, the heart cannot feel. Do you think, and you spoke so movingly about what we hope we do at the nation, do you think that journalism in the last 10 years has changed the landscape? Has it opened people's eyes? Is there more coverage, eyewitness? And I'm also interested in your sense of what we see at the nation as a growing movement of more, how to put it, I don't like to put progressive, but humane prosecutors who are understanding the racism of the death
Yeah.
penalty?
Because of all the mistakes that have happened, prosecutors are less eager now to go for the death penalty and then be found out that they hid the evidence, that they see they're in complete charge of evidence. And progressive is not a bad
It's
word.
not. It's what?
Human rights. Progressive is not a bad word. It means,
No, I know, but I think humane also. I mean, progressive.
Yeah, sure. Human rights. Human rights. UN Declaration of Human Rights.
Yes.
That's what we all have to follow.
Yeah.
Not everybody shares faith. And I mean, what has been done with religion? I quote Holden Caulfield and Catherine Rye all the time. He said, poor Jesus, if he could see what's being done in his name, he'd puke. That we got to get religion right. So I need to learn from you. But what I know about journalism is I know that the print journalism is really undergoing. I mean, it's really been with the whole thing. And we got to do more and more things online. And the more we can get eyewitnesses out there to report people's stories and just give it to people, to me that what the New York Times did with the 1619 project of the first, I mean, they helped crack something open there. Just read in the Washington Post now about the importance of changing textbooks. Yes. And I remember in Louisiana, when, in the textbooks in grammar school, you couldn't say, you didn't even use the word slaves. Texas didn't use the word slave. They said workers came. So print, I think, is very important. Books and things where people hold them in their hand and read them. And then you have a strong online as well. That's what we got to do.
Could I just ask you one follow on about religion?
Bring it on.
You talked about someone who writes for us, who I'm sure you know is Reverend Barber, who is just, as he looks out at what is often considered religious, but you described it, I think, as liberation, and it's about the liberation of
and bonding people, connecting people as brothers and sisters. Yeah.
And do you see that sense of religion moving forward, backwards?
It's mixed. So you have Barber. You have what Biden's doing.
Yep.
Look how he's changing the language. No more aliens. The use of language. He's changing the lexicon and the way we even speak to each other. And just look at it. You can just see that happening. And there's a craziness that goes on with religion, a kind of cult kind of thing where you take one little pet issue and you absolutize it and make it everything. And what's going on in the Catholic Church in that. And it's in a way you put on the moral cloak of I'm for innocent life, for the unborn. And that's all you talk about. You'd never talk about when the kid is born and what children need and what their mothers need. It's just a lot of ways that you can go, that religion's tricky. It's just really tricky. In my own awakening, look how long it took me till I was 40 to get the connection between religion and justice being in there with people.
Last question, Supreme Court. There are all kinds of possibilities, but the court is, to say the least, a very difficult instrument and beast at this moment.
They are.
And the new edition speaks of religious faith.
Terribly. I mean, Barr giving this talk to Notre Dame Law School, it's terrible. Like religion is being impinged upon. We have to speak up for our religious freedom. I mean, the heart of every spiritual tradition is compassion. Every spiritual tradition, that's what it's about. And I mean, in the gospel, it's put in terms of that the hungry are fed and the stranger is welcomed. And I mean, that's what it's got to be about. And so you have these aberrations. I don't look for anything from the court. I look for them to do damage every time. So, but we got to get the Constitution to the people. That discussion of the Constitution, and again, the beacon of the UN Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, has got to be the beacon that we all follow, and everybody can get on that ground together.
Thank you, sister. I'd add the 4 freedoms to the Universal Declaration.
Right. Eleanor, boy, She sure worked to help that come. You know, in the very first debate, Article 3, right to life, they wanted to put it in an exception, except for those legally condemned to execution. She said, no exceptions. We have to start with a universal basic declaration. And I've learned a lot from Amnesty. Inalienable human rights are not rights that governments give for good behavior or take away for bad behavior. They're inalienable in that right to life. And especially now that we're seeing that power, that raw power in the hand of somebody like Trump, it's really sparked a debate about the death penalty that I think is going to help end it quicker.
Thank you. Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions from, thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. We have lots of questions from our audience, and I'm gonna raise them up to you, Sister Helen.
Try to make them short so we can cover a lot.
Okay, I'll do my best. Adrian asks, do you see the Catholic Church ever committing to stand against the death penalty and torture in a way that they have taken a stand against abortion?
It's already happening. It happened. This is the 1300 years of dialogue. I got to have a direct dialogue with Pope John Paul II, and he really was the one who moved it forward. And I asked him a basic question. I meet a lot of Catholics who claim they're pro-life. What they mean is innocent life. I'm walking with a man to execution, and they have him shackled hand and foot, and he turns to me and says, "Sister, please pray. God holds up my legs as I make this walk. Where is the dignity in killing a person who's been rendered utterly defenseless?" And it did get changed. It got changed in August, but that's 1300 blooming years of dialogue. And so now it's getting out there. One thing to change a document, you have to change hearts and minds of the people. And that comes from direct encounter and people studying together and people reading together and people talking together.
John Howarth asks, your thoughts on winning the hearts and minds of hard right religious conservatives.
I learned this with the death penalty. Jason Epstein, again, my editor at Random House, when we were looking at the book coming out, he said, we're going to divide the population. Roughly about a fifth of people are already in principle against the death penalty. They belong to Amnesty International. They read The Nation. No, he did say that. But he could say that. And the other end of the spectrum, we'll just say they could be on a desert island with Jesus, Martin Luther King, and Gandhi for 6 months, and they're going to come off that island, they're going to say, fry them. They are impervious to conversation, okay? 60% of the American public are ambivalent about the death penalty, and they've never thought about it much. That's your audience. The more I'm learning, and I am reading about this to try to understand what is going on here, it had to be for Trump to be elected that we have a lot of our populace, first of all, that are disconnected from any type of community kind of gathering. You know, in the days of Emerson, they used to have lectures, and what do they call it? The culture of eloquence, where people would come together in community, listen to lectures. It's all now people individually isolated and getting on the internet and getting all this kind of stuff. And it had to be that the government or the politicians were failing people. There was a big disconnect from the real needs of people and what politicians were doing in Washington. So we have a lot of room for growth on that. And when we meet the real needs of people, that is what's going to change things about understanding things. And that's a long way to go. But I do believe that everything Biden's undertaking, he's meeting his goal of the vaccines. He's surpassing it of 100 million vaccines in 100 days. And that is because truth springs up out of the ground and the consciousness has been changing. But that's the answer. It is impossible to get into arguments with people who belong to a cult. It just is. We have to wait, and we have to, as things change, and then we keep the conversation going with people around the real needs of people in our society, coming to understand better the legacy of racism. We all need to understand that.
minimum wage, people's jobs. I mean, all of those kind of real things, healthcare. And those are the things we have to keep moving forward. And as that soil is tilled, I believe we can have new sprouts of understanding that'll come forth, and new dialogue can be possible.
Thank you. From Cindy Cat, she says, we've had an awakening right now, but will that reckoning last after we go back to normal? And I would add to that, you pointed out that part of what brings an awakening is the conversation and bringing experience to people. But part of what has to happen is people have to be able to see things through a different lens. And I wonder how you achieve that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, things are going to change. It's up to us. The future is not inevitable. And we who have the fire and whose eyes have seen enough and are intellectually, not just intellectually sharp, I want to say morally engaged, then we're committed to keep that conversation going. And we have to be really creative. We're going to do a graphic novel of Dead Man Walking to reach young people. And I don't know in journalism, in print, what's possible to have a kind of graphic part of your paper, including humor, to just be another way to wake up people. But we keep conversations going, and the more kind of town halls or group where we can call people together to talk about a subject, like the print could be the spark, but then the calling together of people to have conversations, kind of like we're doing now, I guess. I guess you do this all the time, huh? It's a great thing to do.
Yeah, thank you. And this might be a good moment to tell you that people are joining us from all over the country. We have people from Virginia, Arizona, New York, Alaska, Montana, Colorado. So we have had a great convening of minds to hear you talk today and to ask questions.
That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. That's a whole evolutionary process. I was just listening to this Brian Swim yesterday. It doesn't take a whole bunch of people, but it takes a critical group that begin and are committed. And the content, I've seen that with Dead Man Walking. I mean, it was my first time writing a book. If I hadn't had that good editor to help me, and then kaboom, the book hits. 2 years later, we have a first-rate film that gets Academy Award for Susan Sarandon. Kaboom, the opera, whole other meeting of people, a whole other echelon of people that we had not reached before. Now the graphic novel. And I'm a storyteller more than a lecturer, as perhaps you can tell. That's a Southern thing. And but story. It's got to, because it holds the whole that we have to keep aiming for.
It seems like there's a good lesson there in starting and trying and seeing where it takes you.
Sure. Is there any other way?
I guess not.
Great if we could do a blueprint. So now we're going to color it all in. I mean, it's emergence. That's the way the whole universe works. It emerges out of things. But we put ourselves there. And we put ourselves in the company of people who are committed. We can't do it without community. I mean, you are a community of committed citizens to help further the consciousness of this country. And that's why I feel such a kinship with you.
Oh, thank you. We're so glad to have you here. I have a question from Molly from New Jersey. You mentioned fear, which is behind so much persecution of crime, especially of people of color. How do we overcome fear?
The truth springing up from the ground is we get out there to meet each other. I mean, how did Stacey Abrams and how did the black votes matter in Georgia swing that runoff so that we have a Democratic Senate? Barely, but we have it. How did that happen? What are all those conversations? You know, with Virginia just ending the death penalty, I'm about to talk to a guy, Dale Brumfield. He was the field coordinator in Virginia. picture this, for 3 years. He went, these are cold knocks at doors of people in Virginia. Hi, I'm Dale. I'm for abolition of the death penalty in Virginia. Can we talk about it? Slam, slam, slam. 3 years. But getting on people's front porches and knocking at their door and meeting people face to face. And we have to, if we could have nationwide breakfasts of people of color and white people coming together for breakfast across the nation, if we would do that and people just meeting each other, that's what we got to do. Because as long as you separate, you believe that's what tends to build our fears and suspicions, because we don't meet people. I mean, look what you probably thought of nuns at some point in your life. Those mean nuns hitting those kids with rulers. Some did, but it ain't all of us. And it's not most of us. But I mean, you know how it goes.
Yes. One of our attendees who didn't put their name down asks, what steps do you think need to be taken to ensure that President Biden works to end the death penalty or commutes the sentences of everyone remaining on federal death row?
First, we must trust him. We must not come in as we got to make sure he does what he says he's going to do. We're going to hold his feet to the with that antagonistic kind of thing. We can trust him. He's certainly, there's not going to be any executions under his watch. And we look at all the things on his plate. And then when it comes time, maybe before he leaves, they tried to do this with Obama. Obama had a chance and he didn't do it. But always, you got to look at everything people are dealing with. He needs our compassion. He needs our truthfulness. But before he leaves office, if he could commute every one of those sentences, that would really help. But just what Trump has done, and you see the raw power of that decision over life and death. Look at Lisa Montgomery. When they told her the date of execution, January 12th, she kind of looked away wistfully and said, 8 days. 8 days before Biden would become president, she would live. She's going to die at the hands of this man. Look at the vagaries and the capriciousness of the whole thing. So, and we do want to work with him. We want to support him in every way we can. We want to support the Democrats to do the right things when the bills come up. We do what we can with the others, but as they lose more and more elections, or as the people have their needs satisfied, and they can see literally what side their bread is buttered on, who's helping them the most. That's where the change, that's what we have to be about.
Are there any particularly good allies in Congress for hearing your message?
I mean, I know of some, of course, but I have to tell you, I'm not that aware of the whole political scene in Congress. I'm sure there are others who could speak to that better. I mean, I know we got good people like Jamie Raskin. God, they laid out the case, and we're gonna watch Southern District of New York, and that look what happened to poor Trump. His court. Those people he put on that court, they betrayed him. One more witch hunt going on because they said his tax returns can be turned over to that grand jury. Now, you know, his own court betraying him. Isn't that pitiful?
It's my heart is broken for him, as I'm sure everybody else's is here. So a question from Gia. She asks, what do you think the role of a spiritual leader is in a time of mass grief? So due to the pandemic or mass incarceration or others?
You know, spirituality is what puts us in touch with our wholeness, you know, our deep soul. Biden has done it twice to just help the country attend to the deaths and grief. That needs to be done all over at the local level. And then, I mean, we've been traumatized in a lot of ways by this, the separation. People dying. I know one friend, her mother was in Los Angeles, and every time she tried to go see her at the nursing home where she was separated by glass. So she waited till her mother had to go to the doctor, went in the ambulance with her and held her all the way to the doctor, the suffering, the unspeakable suffering of the deaths and the separations. So we want to really attend to that. And when we're healing, we need to have tenderness for ourselves and each other. And at local levels, how can we heal? Maybe you can play a role in that, and calling groups together to just help some. It's big, but hey, sometimes we all feel like a little bitty Rolade in a great big stomach. I can tell you, for prison reform and the whole thing, with our community at our side, we press on. We
Yes.
press on.
Yes, we do. We have an audience full of motivated people, and Claudia Klein asks, "I'd like to do more to help abolish the death penalty. What would you recommend I do as an activist?"
You get in there. Where's a state moving and getting close to ending it? And get in there and send them resources and postcard campaign. Go find out. Go dig and see who's close, and then get in touch with that little Energizer Bunny state coalition. That's where it's going to be in there, and then see and just say, how can I be of help? What can I do?
We have an extraordinary comment in the chat, certainly an example of, well, radical justice. Catherine Kitchen says, "I was able to get the man who killed my father out of prison. You inspire me."
Oh man, who inspires who? Wow. See, those are the ones, and these victims, other victims' families that say killing it. I mean, when New Jersey had the legislative debates about abolishing the death penalty, 62 murder victims' families like Catherine turned up and just said, don't kill for us. The death penalty just re-victimizes us, puts us in a holding pattern of waiting for some justice. And watching you kill the one who killed my loved one is supposed to heal me. They exposed it. And more victims' families, of course, are doing that. We also have the witnesses now of wardens and guards who have done the killing for us and have been part of it close hand. And how they don't. I think we're not killing people in Louisiana anymore. We haven't for 17 years. Is because the guards and the warden don't want to do it anymore. We kill too many people. When you got to be the one to do the killing. And their stories begin to come out.
Thank you. A question from Alice. As the use of death penalty decreases across the country, more people have started to focus on problems with life without parole sentences. Do you see a similar brutality in life without parole sentences? And do you see that as the next frontier in this fight?
Right. It's already begun. It's, of course, that's another sentence of death in prison. You're sentenced to die in prison with no hope of change. If there's one thing we know about human beings, first of all, everybody's worth more than the worst thing they've ever done. Human beings, what it is built into us, transcendence, to be more than we were before, to grow. With the slightest amount of education in prison, people change. They've already done these studies when people can get slightest education. Brandeis, Louis Brandeis, the first Jewish Supreme Court justice, he looked at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He said, pursuit of happiness, that couldn't be a vaguer, more airy term than pursuit of happiness. I see it as education. When people are educated, people begin to get a sense of who we are, agency, what we can do. And of course, we're going to have to change life without parole. And we're on the way to doing it. You can see it's in the air. Penal reform is in the air. You can just see in the consciousness. It's out there and it's rising already. Alternative drug courts. I don't know if you saw the exchange with Cory Booker and Merrick Garland yesterday on racism in the whole criminal justice system. It is worth looking at. Go find it on C-SPAN and see it. Because if you want to look at direct legacy of slavery, legal lynching is the death penalty and the whole penal system. There's a great book, Slavery by Any Other Name. What are the plantation owners going to do for workers after all the slaves have been freed? And what they do is You arrest a black man just for loitering or something, get him on something, send him to jail. He serves his time. He's about to get out and say, oh, you owe us for lodging and you owe us for food. And you send him to a work camp where he dies. They found a mass graveyard outside of Birmingham near mine. And it's to get the workers. They still call Angola, our prison, Louisiana State Penitentiary, the farm. And you go to Angola and you see a column of prisoners with hose across their back, a guard on horseback at the front of the column and a guard on horseback with a gun at the back. And there it is. And you get 2.5 cents an hour. And it's a whole system. And see, but I had never been involved with the prison system. What did I know about prisons? And it was that plunging into that, getting involved in that and seeing what went on that just woke me up, radically woke me up. And then, of course, witnessing the execution and the whole process, and then looking at that Constitution and seeing the kind of arguments the court was making about the appeals courts and upholding these death sentences, no matter what injustices had happened at trial. So it takes courage, but you know, when you're saying, oh my God, this is so wrong, I cannot be neutral about it. I'm going to get a good night's sleep. I'm going to meet with my friends. We're going to have a nice little belt of scotch or bourbon. We're going to play cards, but then we're going to get in there and show up again the next day. And creative, out of the box. What else can we do? How can we do this differently? How can we get all kind of dialogue going on?
And that leads to a good question of, I mean, how do you renew yourself so that you're in it day after day?
Just like you do. First, you stay close to the fire. It means reading. It means continually learning. That's true when you're writing a book too. You get blocked. You feel like you're doing a breaststroke through peanut butter. Doesn't seem like very promising. You read, you get new information, you get new insights, and you meet in community. And give yourself a break. I'm reading this great book now called Sabbath. Sabbath. We got to just take a break. Turn off the daggone iPhone. Turn it off for a day. And do art or read literature or go for a walk. Or we got to learn to rest as we go. We have to learn to take breaks. We are driven people in the United States to be productive, be productive, be productive. And sometimes you got to just step back. And it's a deep book. It's called Sabbath. I forget the name of the guy who wrote it. But that's very deep what was written in the scripture. And on the seventh day, God rested. Well, I always pictured there was a little hammock. God took a little rest, had a little lemonade, did my work, now I rest. It's a state of mind and peacefulness. We have to learn to rest as we go. And how do we do that in a peaceful manner? That we do not have to carry the whole world. We just have to be our little color in the mosaic to do our part. And we have to trust community. And because we know we're in it for the long haul, when the setbacks come, we get a good night's sleep. We love our friends. We replenish, and we stay in the struggle.
Thank you. We have a question about the film from John F. The question, it seems that, unlike so many other films about historical events, Dead Man Walking rendered the story in a reliable fashion. It didn't distort obvious points. How involved were you in the production process for the film?
Every line and every scene. I couldn't have worked with more collaborative people than Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon. Susan Sarandon read the paperback when it came out in 94 and pestered Tim for 9 months. He probably did it for domestic tranquility to do the Bloomin' movie. Did you read the Nun's book? Did you read the Nun's book? She knew he was the one to do it, and he'd do it with boldness. And I was right in there with him. I learned everything I know about filmmaking. I learned from watching. I didn't know when they show them driving in a car on the highway, they're not really driving the car, they're on the back of a truck. I had everything to learn. And the shaping of the story, see, All along, Tim didn't want to call the movie Dead Man Walking. And of course, at Random House, they know if we can be the title of the book, people are going to go read the book. No, we can't put dead in the title. People don't, when you hear dead, man, that makes them. At the end, after it was put together and the producers came over from London to look at it, we saw the screening in New York. I said, Tim, what are we going to call it? He goes, oh, Dead Man Walker. We got to call it Dead Man. And if you notice at the end of the film, big letters, read Sister Helen Prejean's book, Dead Man Walking. The film became the catalyst, led people to the book. And if you have people looking at a film and reading a book, reading is really important, more important than it's ever been. We get such fragmented information through Google and we can just summon up any fact, but cohesive reading and the reading of books is just really an important thing. And what I'm doing now with River Fire on becoming an activist and Dead Man Walking too is to I've already tried it. It's working. It's do it with classes and do it with groups. Do an introductory video of the raw experiences that went to the making of the book, writing it. A group does a silent reading of the book and takes notes and journal entries of their own reaction. Again, text is never neutral. Sometimes the text reads us, calls us, we react to it, journal entries, and then a final sharing on Zoom in which they can ask questions and we do sharing together. It's very dynamic and so I'm trying to do that as much as I can all over the country.
That's incredible. Wendy, who's in our audience today, says that the Sabbath is by Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Heschel.
And Alana, our crack intern, has already put a link to where people can get that book in the chat.
Fantastic. Heschel is a wonderful, wonderful. You know, he marched with Martin Luther King. He says, when you pray with your legs, it's great, great man.
That is a great way to put it. We are almost out of time. This has been extraordinary, and there's really so much thanks to you in the chat, and thank you so much. And you know, I like to end on a note of hope when we can, and I wonder what you see. What you see that's hopeful in the future, and how people can tap into that.
First, watch the young people. Just look at what young people are doing. Look at what they did in Parkland. Look at Greta Thunberg sitting in front of the Swedish Parliament. And we need to invest in the young and get to the young in every kind of way we can. And look what's happened in our country. We got Trump out. We came close. We came really close of losing our democracy. We got him out. We need to take a deep breath and let him go and rebuild our country. It's a very hopeful time. And we need those of us who have white, and to be white is to have white privilege. We must dig in there and learn. We need to really learn about the legacy of slavery in our country and how it has affected every system. And then wherever we have a chance to support groups like Black Lives Matter and groups getting in there to make it, we got to be in there. What I know about hope is an active verb. And when we're standing on the sidelines, and especially since we can be flooded with so much information about everything wrong in the world, we can just like descend into this pool of despair. But the minute we put our hands on a rope, the simplest thing, the writing of a letter, the reading of a book, the meeting with people, life flows through us. We're energized, and that's when hope comes alive. I was just reading this book, Bare Understanding, hanging on by my fingernails, but on physics. Electrons only exist when they are interacting. They have no existence without the interaction. And I kind of think that's true of us as human beings too. And couple it with solitude and silence and meditation so we know our own inner souls, that our deep souls can speak to us. To me, those are things that keep us alive. Interesting, Jesus never used the word that he was a savior. he talked about life. I've come that you may be fully alive. There was a graffiti on the wall in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Is there life before death? It's all about being alive. And the two divine sparks in us, to know truth, that infinite desire in us to know truth and to keep learning, and to love and expand our love and deepen our love wider and wider into the community. That's to be alive, I think.
Thank you, Sister Helen. Well, thank you for sharing truth and love with us today. Both really
My
shine
joy.
through. And Donna in our chat says, Sister Helen, you rock. And I think that sums it up. We're
Well,
so
thank you. I love to be a rockin' nun. Okay, great. Love to you all out there. Great to be. I feel your presence, even though I can't see your faces.
Yeah, thank you. This was so extraordinary. And to everybody in our community, please join us in 2 weeks for our next conversation. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes and I got a little lost, Sister Helen, because I'm so excited to be talking to you. I just confused myself. We're going to be in conversation with the longtime civil rights leader and president of People for the American Way, Ben Jealous, on March 10th. He's going to be followed by the youngest senator in Maine's history, climate activist Chloe Maxman, on March 24th. So please stay tuned. We're going to be announcing more events, and we look forward to sharing all these conversations with all of you. And Sister Helen, thank you again. This was extraordinary.
Thank you. It was a joy.